On the night Harrison Vance was set to announce his candidacy for the state Senate, hundreds of cameras were pointed toward the grand stage, but the massive screen behind him did not play his polished campaign video. Instead, it was his own voice that suddenly filled the grand ballroom, captured in secret, crisp and clear through the state-of-the-art sound system. A wife who can't even bear children, what good is she? My name is Clara, and for most of my 65 years, I have lived a life defined by discipline and service. As a retired military nurse, my hands, which once skillfully inserted IVs under the duress of battlefield fire, now find their purpose in the gentle art of pruning rose bushes in my quiet garden. I thought my days of fighting were long over. My final and most important mission was simply to love my only daughter, Lily. I raised her to be strong, yes, but also to be kind, to trust, to see the good in a world where I had seen so much of the bad. When I entrusted her gentle heart to Mark Vance and his polished, powerful family, I believed I was giving her a life of safety and comfort I could never provide. I never imagined they would become a new kind of enemy, one who wages war not with bullets and bombs, but with whispers and smiles, and whose particular brand of cruelty is carefully hidden behind the impenetrable veneer of perfect family values. I remember Lily as a little girl with perpetually paint-stained hands and a laugh that could make the sunniest day seem brighter. Her heart was a boundless reservoir of empathy. She was the child who would spend hours trying to fashion a splint for a beetle's broken leg, or who would give her entire allowance to a homeless man without a second thought. Our bond wasn't forged in grand gestures, but in the quiet, sacred moments that stitch a life together. We spent countless nights curled up on our worn-out armchair, reading bedtime stories until my voice grew hoarse, her small head resting trustingly on my shoulder. We perfected the art of baking chocolate chip cookies on rainy Saturday afternoons, our kitchen filling with the warm, sweet scent of melting chocolate and shared joy. On warm summer evenings, we'd sit on the fire escape of our small apartment, watching the city lights blink one by one as she shared her dreams and I shared my hopes for her. She was my entire world, the gentle, beautiful melody in the sometimes harsh symphony of my life. The day she met Mark Vance at a university function, I saw a light ignite in her eyes that I had never seen before. He was everything a mother could hope for her daughter: handsome, ambitious, and utterly charming. He came from what appeared to be a flawless family, and he treated Lily like a precious, delicate treasure. He listened intently to her dreams of becoming a botanist, opened every door for her, and promised me, with a hand over his heart, that he would cherish her forever. On their wedding day, held in the immaculate, sprawling gardens of the Vance family estate in Denver, I felt a profound sense of peace wash over me. My beautiful, kind-hearted daughter had found her fairy tale. Harrison Vance, Mark's father, a man whose powerful presence filled any room he entered, clapped me on the shoulder, his smile broad and reassuring. His grip was firm, a symbol of his station in life. "Clara," he had said, his voice booming with a politician's practiced confidence, "you are not losing a daughter today. We are gaining one. She will be a treasured and vital part of the Vance family." His wife, Eleanor, a woman of impeccable style and a pillar of the Denver charity circuit, had embraced me warmly, calling me sister. The Vances were the very epitome of class, success, and old money grace. Their home was a sprawling mansion filled with priceless art and antique furniture, a testament to Harrison's legendary business acumen. They welcomed Lily with open arms, hosting elegant dinner parties in her honor and introducing her to their exclusive circle of influential friends. They spoke of family legacy, of tradition, of the profound importance of raising the next generation of Vances to carry the torch. In those early, golden days, I saw them as a safe harbor for my daughter's gentle heart, a powerful fortress that would protect her from the world's harshness. I would return to my quiet life after each visit, my heart full to bursting, believing I had done my job as a mother perfectly. I had raised a wonderful daughter, and she had found a family that would protect, value, and adore her. It felt like the perfect, happy ending to her story. I had no way of knowing that it was only the beginning of a living nightmare, and the polished, welcoming facade of the Vance family was nothing more than a beautiful curtain hiding a stage set for unimaginable cruelty. The first crack in the perfect family portrait was almost imperceptible, a hairline fracture in a masterpiece that you could only see if you knew exactly where to look. It appeared in the weeks following Lily's first miscarriage. The news itself had been delivered via a short, clipped phone call from Mark. His voice, which was usually so smooth and solicitous, was flat, sterile, and devoid of any shared emotion. "There were complications, Clara," he'd said, as if reading from a medical chart. "The doctor said it's quite common. She's resting now." There was no warmth, no acknowledgement of my own grief as a grandmother-to-be. When I finally spoke to Lily later that day, she sounded small and lost, her voice a fragile whisper that threatened to break with every word. "They were all so disappointed, Mom," she told me, and I could hear the silent tears she was trying to hold back. Harrison, he kept talking about the importance of a strong bloodline, of continuing the family name. In the months that followed, the Vances' attitude shifted in subtle, chilling ways. The loving daily check-in calls from her mother-in-law Eleanor dwindled to polite weekly inquiries filled with pointed questions disguised as benevolent concern. "Are you eating properly, dear? You simply must take better care of yourself. For Mark's sake, you know." Harrison Vance, during a tense family dinner I attended, made a formal toast to health and family continuity, his cold, assessing eyes lingering on Lily's downcast face for a moment too long. It wasn't a look of kindness, it was the look of a chairman evaluating a failing investment. Mark, her husband, began to subtly distance himself, making comments about how Lily was being overly emotional and that her persistent sadness was casting a negative shadow over their beautiful home. They were no longer comforting her in her grief, they were actively managing her, as if her pain was a public relations problem, an inconvenient stain on their perfect family image. Even then, witnessing all of this, I made excuses for them. I was a mother, and a mother's primary illogical instinct is to mend, to smooth over, to keep the peace at all costs. I told myself their coldness was simply their clumsy, patrician way of dealing with a grief they couldn't understand. "They lost a grandchild too, honey," I would tell Lily over the phone, my voice full of a conviction I didn't truly feel. Men like Harrison, from that generation, they don't know how to express their feelings. They see vulnerability as a weakness. I encouraged her to be patient. I advised her to try and be more cheerful for Mark, to not let her sadness consume her. Looking back, I see I was trying to preserve the fairy tale, for her sake and perhaps for my own. To admit that their behavior was not just clumsy, but intentionally cruel, would be to admit that I had handed my precious, gentle daughter over to a family of cold-blooded monsters. And so I became a silent accomplice to her pain, urging her to ignore the blaring red flags, to dismiss the cutting remarks, to believe that this was just a difficult chapter, not the entire horrifying story. I didn't want to believe that their love was conditional and that my daughter's worth, in their eyes, was tied directly and solely to the function of her womb. It was a truth too terrible to contemplate, so I chose willful, unforgivable blindness instead. I am so glad you are here. If you are following this story, please take a moment to like the video, subscribe, and let me know what city you are listening from. I want to know how far our story has traveled. After the second miscarriage, a year later, the subtle chill that had permeated the Vance household became a palpable, biting frost. The process of isolating Lily began in earnest. a quiet, systematic campaign to sever her from any external source of support or validation. It was executed with the precision of a military operation. Her closest friends, who used to drop by for coffee and conversation, were now met at the door I mark, who would politely but firmly inform them that Lily was not feeling well or was under strict doctor's orders to rest. The message was clear: you are no longer welcome here. The invitations to their own numerous social gatherings, which had once included Lily as the radiant hostess, now excluded her entirely. "It's better if you stay home, darling," her mother-in-law Eleanor would say with a gentle pat on her hand that felt more like a restraint than a comfort. "These parties are so stressful. You don't want to bring everyone down with your mood, do you?" Her phone calls with me, her own mother, became shorter, more stilted, and fraught with a new, unspoken tension. I could often hear Mark in the background, clearing his throat pointedly, or asking in a loud, passive-aggressive tone, "Is that your mother again?" He began to expertly frame my calls as an intrusion, a source of stress that was hindering Lily's recovery. "My mother means well, Lily. I know she does," he would say, his voice a perfect poisonous blend of reason and manipulation. "But she just doesn't understand the kind of pressure we're under. Talking to her just seems to upset you more." He was building a wall around her, brick by insidious brick, convincing her it was for her own protection, when in reality it was a prison designed to leave her utterly alone and dependent on her captors. With her support system systematically dismantled, Lily's role within the family underwent a grotesque and complete transformation. She was no longer the cherished daughter-in-law, the potential mother of the next Vance heir. She became the indentured servant. The family's expectations shifted entirely from her bearing children to serving them in every conceivable way. It was an unspoken, cruel transaction. Since her body had failed in its primary duty, she would now have to atone through endless, thankless labor. She was expected to plan, cook for, and clean up after every one of their frequent dinner parties, often for dozens of their friends and business associates. The full-time housekeeper, a woman who had been with the family for years, was suddenly let go under the guise of cutting back on unnecessary expenses. A laughable excuse in a home where thousands of dollars were spent on French wine and new Italian suits for Mark. Lily's days became a monotonous, soul-crushing blur of thankless chores, all of it performed under a constant, withering cloud of passive-aggressive criticism. "The roast is just a little dry tonight, isn't it, dear?" Eleanor would comment at the dinner table, a slight, disapproving frown on her perfectly made-up face. "Harrison has such a sensitive palate, you know." Mark, the man who once praised her every culinary effort, now treated her cooking with a bored indifference, sometimes pushing his plate away after only a few bites. After one particularly grueling party, where Lily had single-handedly cooked and served a 5-course meal for 20 people, I called to see how she was holding up. Her voice was thin and exhausted. "Mark said I forgot to put out the proper silver cheese knives," she whispered, her voice thick with shame. "He said I embarrassed him in front of his boss." They were breaking her spirit, one small, cruel, calculated cut at a time. She was being systematically punished for her body's perceived failure, forced to atone for her miscarriages through endless, unacknowledged servitude. She was no longer a wife or a daughter in that house. She was a ghost, a silent, tireless machine whose only purpose was to maintain the perfect, polished surface of the Vance family life, a life from which she was now completely and utterly excluded. The call that would finally shatter my willful blindness came just a week before Christmas. It was Lily, but I barely recognized her voice. It was so small and fragile, it seemed to be coming from a great distance, a barely audible whisper. "Mom," she said, and I could hear the immense effort it took for her to speak. They said I'm not to join them for Christmas dinner this year." I felt a cold dread, sharp and painful, snake its way up my spine. "What do you mean, honey? Why on earth not?" There was a long, agonizing pause on the other end of the line, a silence filled with the terrible, ragged sound of her trying to stifle a sob. They said my sadness is contagious," she finally managed to choke out, "that I would ruin the festive mood for everyone." That was it. That was the mother in me awoke, and the soldier took over. I hung up the phone. I canceled my shifts at the clinic. I threw some clothes in a bag. I booked the next available flight to Denver. My job, my commitments, my own quiet life, they all vanished in the face of this new urgent mission. My only objective was my daughter. I didn't call to tell them I was coming. An unannounced visit was a severe deviation from my usual predictable routine. But as a military nurse, I knew that sometimes the element of surprise is your most effective diagnostic tool. I wanted to see the truth for myself, unfiltered by their carefully crafted excuses and polished lies. The flight was a 5-hour blur of simmering rage and heart-pounding anxiety. I spent the entire time staring out the window at the endless, indifferent expanse of clouds, my mind replaying every conversation, every ignored red flag, every piece of advice I had given Lily that had inadvertently aided her abusers. The closer I got to Denver, the heavier the sense of foreboding became. It felt like I was flying into a war zone. I arrived on Christmas Eve. The city was a winter wonderland, blanketed in a pristine layer of fresh snow. The air was frigid, its bite sharp against my exposed skin. I took a taxi from the airport, the driver making cheerful small talk about his own family's holiday plans, a conversation that felt like it was happening in another universe. I had him drop me off at the corner of their street. I wanted to approach the house on foot, an unseen observer. As I walked down the silent, snow-covered lane, the Vance mansion came into view, blazing with light and warmth against the dark, wintry landscape. It looked like a postcard, perfect and inviting. Through the large, uncurtained picture window, I could see the scene inside. A towering, beautifully decorated Christmas tree stood in the corner, its lights twinkling merrily. The Vance family and a host of their elegant guests were gathered in the living room, laughing and raising glasses of champagne, their faces glowing in the warm firelight. It was a picture of festive, effortless joy, a perfect family celebrating a perfect Christmas. But my daughter, my Lily, was not in that picture. My eyes scanned the room, desperately searching for her face, but she was nowhere to be seen. A knot of pure ice formed in my stomach. And then I heard it, a faint, almost inaudible sound, a soft whimper carried on the freezing wind. It came from the direction of the wide, shadowed porch. I walked around the side of the house, my boots crunching loudly in the snow. And there, huddled in an old wooden rocking chair tucked into the darkest corner, was my daughter. She was wearing only a thin cotton blouse and worn-out leggings. She had no coat, no blanket. Her arms were wrapped around herself in a futile attempt to generate warmth, her frail body shaking uncontrollably in the 32-degree weather. Her face was ashen, her lips blue, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She had been cast out from the warmth and light of her own home, left to shiver in the dark on Christmas Eve, all because her grief was an inconvenience to their celebration. I didn't scream. I didn't run to her. The years of discipline, of seeing trauma, and acting with cold, immediate efficiency took over. The wave of maternal panic that threatened to drown me was pushed aside, replaced by a focused, glacial fury. I walked back to the front of the house, my movements as deliberate and silent as a predator. Each step I took in the snow was a declaration of war. I stormed up the porch steps and, without knocking, I kicked the heavy oak door. It wasn't a tentative tap, it was a single, violent blow, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the still, snowy night. The laughter and cheerful music inside stopped instantly. After a stunned moment, the door swung open. It was Mark. He stood there, a half-empty glass of champagne in his hand, a look of pure annoyance on his handsome face that quickly morphed into shock when he saw me. "Clara, what in God's name are you?" He didn't get to finish the sentence. I pushed past him, my shoulder slamming into his chest with a force that sent him stumbling backward, champagne sloshing onto the expensive Persian rug. I strode into the center of the room, my cold, hard gaze sweeping over the stunned faces of the Vance family and their guests. Then I turned without a word and walked back out onto the porch. I gently scooped my shivering, barely conscious daughter into my arms. She felt as light as a child. I carried her back into the living room and laid her down on their immaculate white sofa, a fragile, broken bird in the heart of their gilded cage. I stood over her, a silent, immovable guard, daring any of them to speak. The room was utterly, terrifyingly silent. I could feel every eye on me. Harrison Vance was the first to recover, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "What is the meaning of this intrusion?" "Intrusion?" I turned to face him, my voice dangerously quiet. "I found my daughter, your daughter-in-law, freezing to death on your porch, and you have the audacity to call this an intrusion?" That night, in a sterile, anonymous hotel room, I held my daughter as she finally broke, her body racked with a fever from the cold. She cried for hours, a gut-wrenching torrent of pain and shame and apologies that weren't hers to make. "I'm sorry, Mom," she sobbed, her body trembling in my arms. "I'm so sorry I failed them." They had so thoroughly broken her spirit that she genuinely believed their cruelty was her fault. As I held her, rocking her like she was a small child again, my grief hardened into a diamond-hard resolve. I would not just rescue my daughter, I would make them pay. I would dismantle their perfect world, piece by piece, until they were left with nothing but the ugly, inescapable truth of who they really were. As Lily finally cried herself to a restless, feverish sleep in the anonymous hotel bed, my mind shifted. The raw emotional chaos of a mother finding her child in peril receded, replaced by the cold, calculated precision of a military nurse triaging a battlefield. The enemy was clearly identified, the entire Vance family. The primary casualty was my daughter, but the wounds were deeper than just physical cold. They were psychological, inflicted over years with systematic cruelty. The objective, therefore, was not simply extraction. It was the complete and utter neutralization of the threat. My grief, which had been a wild, raging fire just hours before, had now cooled and compressed into a focused, blue-white flame of pure, unadulterated rage. I knew that a simple emotional confrontation would be worse than useless against people like the Vances. They were masters of a certain kind of warfare. They would twist my anger, expertly label me as a hysterical, overbearing mother-in-law, and use my very real pain as further proof of my family's inherent instability. No, this situation required a different strategy, one that played to my strengths. As a nurse, I was trained to observe, to document, to see the clinical signs and symptoms that others missed. As a soldier, I was trained to identify an opponent's greatest strength and patiently, methodically, turn it into their most vulnerable, fatal weakness. Harrison Vance's greatest strength, the very foundation of his power, was his public image. He was a pillar of the Denver community, a celebrated businessman, a noted philanthropist, and, as I had recently learned from Lily's tearful confessions, a man with carefully managed aspirations for a state Senate seat. His entire identity, his entire empire, was built on a meticulously curated facade of integrity, honor, and above all, family values. That facade, I decided in the dim, quiet light of that hotel room, was the pressure point. That was where I would strike. I began to think not as a mother, but as a strategist. You don't take a fortress with a frontal assault. You lay siege to it. A siege requires patience, intelligence, and undeniable, irrefutable evidence. I knew a conventional legal battle would be a long, costly, and likely futile endeavor. Harrison had connections, money, and a deep understanding of how to manipulate a legal system that often favored the powerful. But the court of public opinion was a different battlefield entirely, one with different rules of engagement. For that battlefield, I needed ammunition. I needed proof that was so visceral, so damning, that it couldn't be spun, dismissed, or buried by their team of high-priced lawyers and public relations experts. I sat in the uncomfortable hotel chair and started making a list, my mind running through every possible source of evidence. What did I know for certain? What could I prove beyond a reasonable doubt? I had my own testimony, of course. I was a credible witness, a decorated military veteran, a retired nurse with a spotless record. But in the end, it would still be my word against the word of a beloved local tycoon. I needed more. I thought about Lily. In her despair, had she documented her own suffering? Had she written emails to friends? Kept a secret diary? It was a long shot, but a possibility I had to explore. My mission was no longer just about getting her out. It was about empowering her to fight back. And I would be her commanding officer, her strategist, and her unwavering shield in this new, undeclared war. The next few days were a blur of quiet, focused activity, all centered around Lily's immediate recovery. I slipped back into my old role as a nurse, my movements efficient and sure. I monitored her fever, made sure she was eating the bland, nourishing broth I prepared, and simply sat with her, offering a silent, steady presence that required nothing of her in return. I took her to a doctor, a trusted old colleague of mine from my years at the local VA hospital. Dr. Evans was a no-nonsense man who was horrified by what he saw. He meticulously documented her malnourishment, the severe dehydration, and the clear clinical signs of incipient frostbite on her fingers and toes. "This is neglect, Clara," he said, his voice grim, his pen scratching across a medical form. "Criminal neglect." He also referred her to a therapist, a compassionate woman who began the slow, painful process of helping Lily find the words for the years of psychological abuse she had endured. As Lily began to regain some of her physical strength, I started my investigation. The first step was to retrieve her essential belongings from the house she had shared with Mark. He was conveniently out of town on a business trip with his father, an absence that provided us with a crucial window of opportunity. I drove Lily to the house, but I had her wait in the car. I didn't want her to set foot in that place again. As I walked through the cold, silent rooms, I felt like an archaeologist excavating a ruin. The house was immaculate, of course, but it was a sterile, impersonal space. There were no pictures of Lily on the walls, no sign of her personality anywhere. It was as if she had been systematically erased. In her bedroom, I began to pack, my search methodical. I was looking for anything, a diary, a letter, a hidden folder on a laptop. As I sorted through her clothes and personal items, I asked her gently later that day, trying not to sound too much like an interrogator. "Honey, in all that time, did you ever write things down, keep a journal, anything like that to get your feelings out?" Lily just shook her head, her eyes still holding that vacant, traumatized look. "I was too tired to write, Mom. It was easier to just disappear." My heart sank. A diary would have been the perfect, undeniable proof. We finished packing her essentials in silence, the only sound the rustling of fabric and the soft closing of drawers. Back in her old bedroom, a room that had been stripped of any personal warmth. I was clearing out the top drawer of a bedside table. It was filled with old paperbacks and magazines. As I lifted the last one, my fingers brushed against something hard and metallic at the very back of the drawer, tucked away and hidden. It was a small, silver object caked in a layer of dust. An old iPod Classic, the kind with the little scroll wheel, a relic from a decade ago. "What's this?" I asked later, back at the hotel, holding it up. Lily glanced at it, and for the first time in days, a flicker of something, fear or maybe a painful memory, crossed her face. "Oh," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'd completely forgotten about that. It's broken. It hasn't worked in years." I looked at the device. It seemed utterly dead, a fossil from a bygone technological era. But on a pure, inexplicable hunch, I slipped it into my pocket. That night, long after Lily had fallen into a fitful sleep, I found an old charging cable in the bottom of my travel bag that miraculously fit the iPod. I plugged it into my laptop, not expecting anything at all. For a long time, the small screen remained stubbornly dark. But then, after almost an hour of charging, a faint, ghostly Apple logo flickered to life. My breath caught in my throat. The device wasn't broken. It was just completely, profoundly drained. When it finally powered on, the screen was simple. Music, videos, extras. I clicked on music, expecting to find old playlists from her happier college days. But the library was completely empty. Confused, I went back to the main menu and clicked on Extras. And there, I found it. A folder labeled Voice Memos. My hand trembled as I clicked on it. The screen filled with a long, scrolling list of files. There were hundreds of them. They weren't named with words. They were named with dates. A meticulous, heartbreaking chronicle stretching back over 2 years. My heart hammered against my ribs. I plugged in my headphones, not wanting to wake Lily, and clicked on the most recent file, dated just 2 days before Christmas. The recording was quiet at first, just the distant sound of clinking dishes from the kitchen. Then I heard Mark's voice, cold and sharp as broken glass. "Is that all you managed to make? You know my father prefers at least 3 side dishes at a formal dinner." Then Lily's voice, so small and apologetic it was almost inaudible. "I'm sorry, I wasn't feeling well today." Then Mark again, his voice laced with a weary, dismissive contempt. "You're never feeling well. It's pathetic." I sat there in the dark, the faint glow of the laptop screen illuminating my face, and I listened as the hidden, ugly, unvarnished truth of my daughter's life poured directly into my ears. She hadn't kept a diary. She had kept a record. She had captured every insult, every threat, every moment of casual cruelty, preserving the evidence of her own torture on a forgotten piece of technology. This wasn't just a weapon. It was an entire arsenal. I spent the entire night until the first pale gray light of dawn began to seep through the hotel room curtains, listening. With each audio file I played, a new, more horrifying layer of their depravity was revealed. It was like descending into the circles of a domestic hell. I listened to Eleanor Vance, the celebrated philanthropist and pillar of the Denver community, tell my daughter in a voice as smooth and cold as marble that her depression was a selfish, unattractive indulgence and that she needed to pull herself together for the sake of the family's image. I listened to Mark's sister Abigail, who I had only met a few times and who had always seemed so sweet, laugh a high, tinkling laugh as she referred to Lily in a phone conversation with a friend as Mark's barren bride. And then I listened to Harrison Vance, the aspiring statesman, the man who wanted to lead the people of Colorado with his unimpeachable family values in what was perhaps the most damning and strategically valuable recording of all. In a file dated from the previous Thanksgiving, I heard him calmly and rationally explaining to Mark that Lily was becoming a significant political liability. His voice was measured, completely devoid of emotion, like a CEO dispassionately discussing a failing asset that needed to be liquidated. A wife who can't produce an heir reflects poorly on a man's son, Harrison's voice filled my headphones. It suggests a weakness in the line, a lack of vitality. When I announce my campaign, the optics are everything. We need to present a united, fruitful, and powerful family. She is becoming a problem that may need to be managed. He wasn't just a cruel and unfeeling father-in-law. He was a cold, calculating political strategist, and my daughter was a disposable pawn to be sacrificed for the sake of his ambition. By sunrise, I was exhausted, but my purpose was forged in steel. I had copied every single audio file to a new, heavily encrypted hard drive. I knew with absolute certainty that taking these recordings to a family court in Denver, a city where Harrison Vance had judges on his speed dial and law firms on retainer, would be a fool's errand. The evidence was personal, recorded without consent. It would be dismissed on a technicality, a violation of privacy, just as my gut had told me. No, this evidence was too potent, too explosive for a small local courtroom that could be controlled and manipulated. This required a national stage. I remembered a man named Ben Carter. We had served together in the same unit 20 years ago. He was a young, idealistic combat journalist embedded with my medical team, fearless to the point of being reckless, with a razor-sharp mind and an unshakable belief in exposing the truth, no matter how powerful the target. I had once spent 6 hours patching him up after he was hit by shrapnel while trying to get a photo of a compromised position. I had saved his life, and we had maintained a loose, infrequent connection over the years. He was now a senior investigative reporter for a major national newspaper in Washington, D.C., the kind of journalist known for breaking stories that had toppled congressmen and ended political careers. I found his number in my old address book. It was 5 a.m. in Denver, 7 a.m. on the East Coast. I dialed. He answered on the second ring, his voice still gravelly with sleep. "Ben," I said, my own voice perfectly steady. "It's Clara from the 212 MASH. I need your help. I have a story for you." I didn't give him all the details over the phone. I just said, "It's about a prominent Colorado businessman with aspirations for the Senate and a very, very dark family secret." His interest was immediately piqued. I sent him 3 of the most explosive audio clips via a secure encrypted service, including the one of Harrison discussing Lily as a political liability. 2 hours later, Ben called me back. His voice was completely different. The professional curiosity was gone, replaced by a cold, hard anger. "Clara," he said, "where are you? I'm booking the next flight to Denver. This isn't just a story. This is a monster we need to expose." Ben and I met in a discreet, out-of-the-way hotel coffee shop the next day. I played him more of the recordings. He listened intently, his face growing grimmer with each file. When I was done, he was silent for a long moment, staring into his cold coffee. "They thought they were untouchable," he said finally, shaking his head slowly. "These are the stories that I live for, the hypocrisy, the staggering abuse of power. It's the trifecta." We spent the next 2 days mapping out the strategy. It was a plan that required perfect timing, military precision, and absolute secrecy. We would not leak the story early. We would not give them a single moment to prepare a defense, to spin the narrative, to intimidate witnesses, or to bury us in lawsuits. While I cared for Lily, Ben's team in D.C. began their own quiet parallel investigation, digging into Harrison Vance's finances, his business dealings, his political connections, looking for any other cracks in the perfect, polished facade. The centerpiece of our plan was Harrison's official campaign announcement. It was scheduled for 3 weeks' time, a grand black-tie gala event at a landmark downtown Denver hotel. It would be broadcast on local television, attended by the state's most powerful figures, and covered by the national press. That, we decided, would be our stage. Ben would ensure that he and his camera crew had front-row seats. My role was to remain completely invisible, to let the Vances believe that Lily and I had retreated, defeated, and broken. We wanted them to walk onto that stage overflowing with arrogance and confidence, utterly blind to the public execution that awaited them. The secret weapon wasn't just the iPod full of secrets. It was the combination of that raw emotional evidence with the cold, professional platform of a national news organization, all timed to detonate at the precise moment of Harrison Vance's greatest, most public triumph. For the next 3 excruciatingly long weeks, Lily and I lived like ghosts. We checked out of the hotel and, with Ben's help, moved into a small, furnished corporate apartment on the other side of town, a place with no connection to me or the Vances. I changed both of our phone numbers and communicated with Ben exclusively through an encrypted messaging app on a new disposable phone. The Vances, as we had anticipated, interpreted our disappearance as a complete and total victory. Through a trusted former neighbor who I had cautiously contacted, I learned the narrative they were carefully spinning. Lily, they told their concerned social circle, had suffered a complete and tragic nervous breakdown, and I, her overwrought and emotional mother, had taken her away to a private facility to get the help she so desperately needed. It was a clever, cruel story, one that simultaneously painted them as the long-suffering, compassionate family, while further cementing the idea of Lily's, and by extension, my instability. It was the perfect preemptive strike against any rumors that might emerge about the events of Christmas Eve. They felt completely invulnerable, believing they had successfully controlled the story and removed the problem. This unearned confidence made them reckless. Mark, feeling utterly untouchable, did exactly what we had hoped he would do. He had his lawyer serve divorce papers to my old, empty apartment. The petition was a work of pure fiction, a legal document that portrayed Lily as a deeply unstable, mentally ill woman who had irrationally and without cause abandoned the marital home. It requested that the court award him the entirety of their significant marital assets, arguing that Lily was in no condition to manage her own affairs and required the responsible stewardship of her husband. Mr. Howard, my old lawyer who I had brought into the loop, gleefully accepted the service on my behalf. The document, filled with lies and slander, would become another powerful exhibit in our growing case against them. The Vances' arrogance was their greatest weakness, a fatal flaw they were too proud to see. They saw our silence not as a strategy, but as surrender. They moved forward with the grand campaign announcement, their confidence soaring with each passing, quiet day. The event was billed as the political launch of the season, a must-attend gala for anyone who was anyone in Colorado politics. Harrison Vance, the self-made man, the champion of family values, was ready to present himself as the strong, moral leader the state needed. I saw the invitations online, posted proudly on the Vance family's social media. They featured a professionally shot photograph of the entire Vance clan, smiling warmly. Mark stood beside his father, his arm wrapped around an empty space where his wife should have been. It was a chilling visual representation of how they had erased her. They all smiled perfect, white, predatory smiles. They were so busy planning Harrison's coronation that they never once thought to look over their shoulders. They never imagined that a harmless, retired nurse and her broken daughter could be orchestrating their public downfall. The days leading up to the announcement were the most nerve-wracking of my life. Lily, though getting stronger with therapy, was terrified. "What if it doesn't work, Mom?" she would ask in the dead of night, her voice trembling. What if they find a way to discredit us, to make everyone believe their lies? I would hold her hand, my own heart pounding, and say with a confidence I sometimes had to force, "The truth is a powerful thing, honey. It has a weight all its own, and we have the truth on our side." On the morning of the event, Ben sent me a simple 2-word message: showtime. I looked at Lily, who was sitting by the window staring out at the snowy peaks of the distant mountains. I walked over and put my arm around her frail shoulders. "Tonight," I said softly, "you get your voice back, and the whole world is going to hear it." The grand ballroom of the Denver Hilton was a glittering sea of power and influence. Crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small car, cast a warm, golden glow on the state's most elite citizens. Politicians in dark suits murmured to CEOs in designer dresses, while wealthy donors, their faces familiar from the society pages, laughed and networked, champagne flutes in hand. It was a room that hummed with the energy of money and ambition. On a dozen massive screens positioned strategically around the opulent space, a slickly produced campaign video played on a continuous loop. It was a masterpiece of political propaganda, showing Harrison Vance with his loving family, visiting a children's hospital, volunteering at a soup kitchen, laughing and hugging on a scenic mountain trail. It was the very picture of American prosperity, compassion, and virtue. Near the stage, Mark, Eleanor, and Abigail played their parts to perfection, greeting guests with practiced smiles and an air of quiet dignity, looking every bit the proud, supportive family unit. They radiated an aura of untouchable confidence, of destiny fulfilled. They had no idea they were standing at their own public execution. Lily and I watched the entire spectacle unfold on a live television feed from a quiet, secure suite on the top floor of a nearby hotel, a command center that Ben had arranged for us. With us was Lily's therapist, a calm and reassuring presence, and a small, trusted team from Ben's newspaper. Seeing her abusers looking so triumphant, so celebrated, made Lily tremble, but I held her hand, my grip firm and steady as a rock. "Just a few more minutes, honey," I whispered, my eyes fixed on the screen. "It's almost over." At exactly 8 o'clock, the ballroom lights dimmed. A respectful hush fell over the glittering crowd. A single, powerful spotlight hit the podium, and Harrison Vance strode onto the stage to a wave of thunderous applause. He beamed, soaking in the adoration, a man at the absolute pinnacle of his life. He adjusted the microphones, took a theatrical sip of water from a crystal glass, and began his carefully rehearsed speech. "My friends, my fellow Coloradans," he started, his deep, resonant voice filling the room with practiced sincerity. "I stand before you tonight as a husband, a father, and a businessman who believes with every fiber of my being in the core values that make this state and this nation great. And the most important, the very bedrock of all of these values, is family." As he spoke that single, fateful word, family, the massive screen behind him, which was supposed to be displaying a majestic, patriotic backdrop of the Rocky Mountains, suddenly flickered. It went completely black for a single heart-stopping second. A nervous murmur rippled through the crowd. Harrison faltered, his smooth delivery momentarily broken. He glanced over his shoulder at the dark screen, a flicker of pure annoyance crossing his face. And then the screen came to life again. But it wasn't the mountains. It was a simple, stark, black screen with a single white line from an audio visualizer pulsing in the center like a malevolent heartbeat. And then a voice filled the ballroom, amplified by the state-of-the-art sound system, a voice that was unmistakably Harrison Vance's, but a version of him the public had never heard before. It was a cold, cruel, dismissive whisper, captured in perfect, damning clarity. "A wife who can't even bear children What good is she? She is a political liability. The entire ballroom fell into a stunned, absolute silence. You could have heard a crystal champagne flute drop from 100 feet away. Harrison Vance froze at the podium, his face instantly draining of all color. He looked like a man who had been shot. The journalists in the press pit, who had been passively listening just moments before, suddenly sprang to life, their cameras flashing like strobe lights, their microphones swiveling toward the speakers. Before Harrison or his frantic, confused staff could react, a second audio clip began to play. This time, it was Mark's voice, laced with a weary contempt. "She just lies in bed all day pretending to be sick. It's pathetic." Then another clip and another. Eleanor's voice, Abigail's voice. A horrifying, intimate symphony of their private cruelty broadcast for the entire world to hear. The carefully constructed image of the perfect family was being systematically, brutally, and very publicly dismantled, one recorded insult at a time. The audio clips continued to play, a relentless, damning cascade of their own vile words. The crowd, which had been adoring and enthusiastic just minutes before, was now a silent, gaping sea of shocked and horrified faces. People were pulling out their phones, their screens held aloft, recording the spectacular, real-time implosion of a political career. Harrison stood at the podium, a statue carved from fear, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, but no sound came out. He frantically gestured toward the sound booth at the back of the cavernous room, his eyes wild with a desperate, impotent panic, but it was useless. Ben Carter's trusted technician had seamlessly and professionally taken control of the entire audiovisual system, and he was not letting go until the final ugly truth had been told. The final, devastating blow, the one that went beyond mere cruelty and into the realm of pure evil, came with the last audio clip. It was the recording of Harrison, his voice calm and chillingly rational, discussing with Mark how Lily was a problem that may need to be managed. The sinister implication, the thinly veiled threat, was unmistakable and utterly chilling. The sound of a collective, audible gasp swept through the ballroom. This was no longer just a family being cruel behind closed doors. This was a man who aspired to lead them, a man who preached family values, discussing his own daughter-in-law as if she were an inconvenient piece of inventory to be disposed of. As the last horrifying recording faded into a deafening, ringing silence, the screen behind the paralyzed Harrison Vance changed. It now displayed a single high-resolution photograph. It was a picture I had taken myself with the disposable phone just a few days after I had rescued Lily from their house. It showed her asleep in the sterile hotel bed, her face pale and gaunt, her closed eyelids bruised with the dark circles of exhaustion and utter despair. She looked fragile, broken, and impossibly small. Below the heartbreaking photo, a simple, stark line of text appeared in bold white letters. "This is what the Vance family's values look like." That was the breaking point. The powerful spell of wealth, charm, and respect that Harrison Vance had spent a lifetime weaving was shattered in an instant. The thunderous applause had been replaced by angry murmurs and scattered shouts of "shame on you." He stood there, a diminished, pathetic figure under the harsh, unforgiving stage lights, as his political ambitions, his pristine reputation, and his entire world imploded before a live national audience. He finally stumbled back from the podium, his face a mask of utter disbelief and horror. The dream was over. The nightmare for him and his family had just begun. In our quiet hotel room, Lily was crying, but for the first time in years, they were not tears of pain or shame. They were tears of release, of catharsis, of vindication. The truth was finally out. Her voice, silenced for so long, had finally been heard. The fallout from that disastrous night was not just swift. It was a media and social apocalypse for the Vance family. Harrison Vance's political career was not merely over, it was annihilated with such spectacular finality that it became an instant case study in political self-destruction. By the next morning, every major news outlet in the country was leading with the story of the Vance family values scandal. The audio clips, now infamous, were played on a relentless loop on cable news channels. And Ben Carter's exclusive, in-depth article, complete with my detailed testimony and the damning report from Dr. Evans on Lily's physical condition, went viral, shared millions of times across every social media platform. The political party, in a desperate, frantic act of damage control, publicly and vehemently disavowed him before noon. His most powerful donors, the very men and women who had been smiling and shaking his hand just hours before, issued stern public statements condemning him and immediately demanded their campaign contributions be returned. His business empire, built on a carefully crafted reputation of unwavering integrity, suffered a catastrophic blow. Lifelong clients canceled multi-million-dollar contracts. Horrified partners publicly distanced themselves, and the company's stock plummeted in the opening hours of trading. The financial fortress he had spent a lifetime building was crumbling to dust under the sheer weight of his own words. Mark was fired from his prestigious architectural firm the very next day. His bosses, citing a morals clause in his contract, told him his continued employment was an untenable liability to the firm's reputation. The divorce proceedings, which he had initiated with such supreme arrogance, were quickly and dramatically turned on their head. With the public release of the audio recordings serving as undeniable proof of long-term, severe emotional abuse, Lily's lawyer filed a powerful countersuit. The original unjust settlement offer was contemptuously thrown out. Faced with overwhelming public pressure, a mountain of irrefutable evidence, and the prospect of a humiliating public trial, Mark was forced to agree to a new settlement. It awarded Lily a significant portion of their marital assets, including substantial alimony for the emotional damages she had suffered. She was finally, legally, and financially free. The social consequences were, in many ways, even more severe and lasting. The Vances became pariahs in the very community they had once ruled with an iron fist of social grace. They were quietly asked to resign from the board of the country club. Their names were unceremoniously removed from the donor walls of charities and museums. Their faces were splashed across tabloid magazines at the grocery store checkout under screaming headlines like "The Hypocrites of the High Rockies." Their powerful friends vanished overnight, their phone calls suddenly going straight to voicemail. The family unit, once a disciplined front of unified arrogance, imploded under the immense pressure. I heard through Ben that their pristine mansion was now a war zone of bitter, endless recriminations. Harrison blamed Mark for his foolish choice of a weak wife. Eleanor blamed Harrison for his reckless, all-consuming ambition. And everyone, it seemed, blamed Mark for marrying the unstable girl who had, in their eyes, brought them all down. Their perfect family, the one they had been willing to torture and discard my daughter to protect, had been a hollow, gilded shell all along. And it shattered at the very first contact with the truth. In the quiet, peaceful aftermath, Lily began to heal. The process was slow, marked by days of progress and nights of lingering shadows, but it was steady. With the financial security she had rightfully won from the divorce settlement, she did something that left me breathless with pride and admiration. She established a small but impactful foundation, a safe haven she named Lily's Light. It was dedicated to providing grants and confidential support for women suffering from the often invisible trauma of miscarriage and infertility, and for those trapped in the silent prisons of emotionally abusive relationships. She took the ugliest parts of her own story and used them not as a weapon for continued revenge, but as a tool to build something beautiful, hopeful, and profoundly kind. David, the gentle paramedic who had been our quiet, steadfast ally from the very beginning, became a constant, steady presence in her life. He saw not her scars, but her incredible strength. And for the first time since she was a young girl, I saw my daughter in a relationship built on a foundation of genuine respect, shared laughter, and gentle kindness. I stayed in Denver, not to hover over her or manage her life, but simply to be near her, to watch with a full heart as she blossomed into the powerful, resilient woman I always knew she was destined to be. We would spend Sundays together, not in a tense, cavernous mansion, but in her cozy little garden. Our conversation easy and comfortable, rebuilding the precious bond that had been so cruelly tested. I learned that justice doesn't always wear a black robe or speak with the gavel of a court. Sometimes justice is the quiet, relentless power of the truth being brought into the bright, unforgiving light. The Vances were never convicted of a legal crime, but they faced a sentence more lasting than any prison term, the public and permanent judgment of their own character. My daughter, the gentle soul they had labeled as weak and useless, had found her voice, and in using it, had brought down an empire of hypocrisy. She had turned her deepest, most painful wounds into a source of strength and healing for others. The ultimate victory was not their spectacular downfall, but her quiet, steady resurrection. And in helping her find her voice, I had rediscovered my own life's purpose, to be the unwavering shield and proudest witness for the daughter who was and always would be my greatest pride and my deepest love.